a question that I think a lot of faith leaders from many different traditions might be asking. How do you build trust and relationships with young people when the institutional church you represent often seems, quote, irrelevant to them, particularly with respect to topics like LGBTQ identities, racism, etc.?
Well, and even worse, I mean, a lot of times those institutions are not necessarily irrelevant, but sometimes seen as openly combative to what the values and ideals that a lot of young people hold. But I think that this is, in some ways, it's the wrong question. And I don't mean to say that this person shouldn't have asked the question. I just mean that it highlights a perspective that what our data is really showing is a little bit outdated. In other words, this approach through an institutional lens that, that the idea here, the implied idea, is that you represent the institutional church, or that young people see you as representing the institutional church. But the data don't really suggest that that's how young people are filtering their thoughts and experiences about faith. So what I think that, to be honest to the data, the way I would push back and answer this question is to say that whether institutions are not irrelevant in a young person's life, the fact remains that you are not irrelevant. A person who demonstrates care and concern in the life of a young person is never irrelevant. So you may hold divergent beliefs from the young person that you're talking to on a variety of issues. Likely you should. I mean, 45 and 50-year-olds don't necessarily have all the same interests as, 14 and 15-year-olds. Life experience and education and all kinds of things. But care and concern translate across boundaries. So if we're approaching it that way, then you will always be relevant. And if you're not approaching it through this relationship, care and concern approach, this relational authority approach that we lay out, likely there's nothing that you can do. Even if you have complete alignment on your values with the young person you're talking to, then you likely you're still not going to be relevant in their lives.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Like, focus on who you are and the relationship you can build instead of getting boggled down by the institution that you represent, because young people are more concerned about you as a person and the way that you're going to connect or identify with them and the questions they're asking and the issues they're concerned about. So I would just build off of that by saying, how do you actually demonstrate that? How do you actually show a posture of, hey, I'm really here for you and your concerns and the topics or issues that are compelling to you? Let me be a listener. Let me be a learner. And if that's the posture, rather than let me tell you the right answer because I have it, that's going to go a long way. And hopefully you can both be learning through the process.
But I think it's important here too, Marta, to stress that, even though a lot of what we talk about at Springtide and the approaches that I'm talking about especially come from research or behavioral science frameworks, but there's an important spiritual faith tradition component that is important for you to point out those connections. So if they think your institution is irrelevant, but then you start leading with this relational stuff and then mapping back onto the points where your religious tradition that you come out of is informing this relationship approach, that begins to reshape and reframe for the young person that you're interacting with what your tradition is all about. In really important ways. Like I know that we don't, at Springtide, we're not advocating for one particular faith tradition. So sometimes it can sound like we're not advocating for faith at all, but that's not true. Like we firmly believe that young people having a healthy spiritual life is a better life for young people. And as leaders, you need to be bringing that tradition, because everybody's tradition speaks to the importance of relationships and how to do it in healthy ways. And that has to happen. That has to be a part of this.
Yeah. So how can the issues that young people are driven by or curious about or bringing to you, how can the heart of your faith tradition speak to that? And if the heart of your faith tradition can affirm this relational value of being in community with one another, of knowing one another's stories, of journeying together, then let that be the driving factor through that ongoing listening and learning.